The rain in Youngstown doesn't just fall. It soaks into your bones like a debt you can't pay. I sat on the curb outside the small bungalow on Miller Street, my hands tucked into the pockets of my old M65 field jacket. Beside me was a single cardboard box. It held a folded American flag, my discharge papers from '69, and Martha's sewing kit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," the deputy had said 2 hours ago. He didn't look me in the eye. He looked at his boots. "The new owner wants the locks changed by noon. Orders are orders." I didn't yell. I didn't plead. A man who spent 43 years at the steel mill knows when the fire is out. But as the neighbors' kids rode their bikes past, pointing at the old man sitting in the dirt, a hot flash of shame crawled up my neck. I had paid rent on time for 30 years. Then Martha got sick. The cancer ate our savings. Then it ate her. 6 months after I buried her, the landlord sold the place to a developer without a word. I stood up, my knees popping like dry kindling. I walked to my 10-year-old Chevy Silverado, the only thing I had left that wasn't in a box or a dumpster. I climbed into the driver's seat. The cab smelled like Martha's lavender soap and old upholstery. I turned the key. The engine groaned, but didn't catch. I tried again. Silence. I looked at the house. Our house. The new locks were already gleaming in the gray light. I had $84 in my pocket and a half tank of gas. I looked at the photo of Martha taped to the dashboard. Her smile was the only light left in Ohio. "Don't worry, honey. I've got a plan," I whispered. But as the sun began to set and the temperature dropped toward freezing, I realized I was lying to a dead woman. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my son, David. I thought he was calling to help. Instead, I read the words that made the world go black. The text from David was short. "Hey, Dad, heard about the house. Sorry, we're headed to Orlando for the kids' spring break. Talk when we get back." I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. No offer of a couch, no "come stay with us," just Orlando. I remembered teaching David how to throw a curveball in the backyard of that bungalow. I remembered working double shifts at the mill just so he could have the cool sneakers. Now I was 79 years old, and I was less important than a trip to see a mouse in a costume. I spent the first night in the truck. The Chevy's bench seat wasn't made for a man with a bad back and a lifetime of hard labor. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket and watched the windows fog up from my own breath. Every time a car drove past, the headlights swept across the cab like a searchlight in a prison camp. Around 3 a.m., the cold became an animal. It bit at my toes and nipped at my ears. I reached into the glove box and found a packet of crackers I'd swiped from the VA clinic last week. I ate them slowly, savoring the salt, trying to pretend it was a meal. The next morning, I drove to the Walmart parking lot. It's the unofficial campground for the forgotten. I saw a young couple in a rusted minivan and an older woman in a sedan filled with trash bags. We didn't talk. We just shared the same hollow-eyed stare over our morning coffee. Mine was a $1 cup from the gas station that I nursed for 3 hours just to stay inside the heat. I needed to check my Social Security balance. I walked into the bank, trying to smooth down my hair and look like a man who belonged. The teller, a girl no older than my granddaughter, looked at my damp jacket with a twitch of her nose. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice loud enough for the people behind me to hear, "your account is overdrawn by $12. I blinked. That can't be right. My pension check should have cleared yesterday. She clicked her mouse, her expression turning from professional to pitying. "There was a manual withdrawal, sir. A large one. It happened 2 days ago." I gripped the edge of the marble counter. My legs felt like they were made of water. "A withdrawal? By who?" The teller leaned in, her voice dropping a notch. "It was authorized via the joint access. David Carter? He used his power of attorney." The air left the room. David. I had given him that power years ago, back when Martha first got sick, just in case I couldn't handle the bills. I never thought he'd touch the emergency fund. The $4,000 I'd saved for Martha's headstone and my own eventual plot. How much did he take? I managed to ask. Everything, sir. He closed the savings account entirely. I walked out of the bank in a daze. The Youngstown wind whipped at my face, but I didn't feel it. I felt empty. I had survived the jungles of Nam and the collapse of the steel industry, but I didn't know how to survive this. My own blood had robbed me while I was sleeping in a parking lot. I went back to the truck. I tried calling David. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached David. We're out making memories. Leave a message." Making memories. With my wife's headstone money. I sat there for a long time, watching the wipers struggle against a fresh dusting of snow. I was hungry, really hungry. My stomach was a tight knot of acid. I looked at the passenger seat. There was a small bag of dog kibble I kept for the strays. I reached for it, my pride screaming, but my body winning. Just then, someone tapped on the glass. It was a police officer. His face was stern, framed by the blue lights reflecting off my wet windshield. I rolled down the window, the cold air rushing in like a slap. "Can't sleep here, Pop," the officer said. "We've had complaints about vagrancy in this lot. You need to move along." I just need a minute, officer," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm a veteran. I lived here 79 years. "I appreciate your service," he said, and I knew he didn't. "But the law is the law. If I see this truck here in 20 minutes, I'm towing it." I started the engine. It sputtered, coughed a cloud of blue smoke, and finally turned over. I drove aimlessly through the streets I used to know. I passed the diner where Martha and I had our first date. It was a cell phone repair shop now. I passed the mill. It was a hollowed-out skeleton of rusted beams. I ended up at the VA hospital, not because I had an appointment, but because it was the only place left where people didn't look through me. I sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. I didn't say a word. I just sat in the warmth, absorbing the heat of the radiators like a lizard on a rock. A nurse, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, eventually noticed me. She'd seen me before when I brought Martha in for her treatments. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You've been sitting there a long time. Are you feeling okay? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine, Sarah," I said, my old-school pride flaring up. "Just waiting for a ride." "At 8 p.m.?" She frowned. She looked at my shoes, soaked through and starting to fall apart at the sole. She looked at the way I was clutching my jacket. She knew. Nurses always know. "Ray, when was the last time you had a hot meal?" I looked away. "I'm not a charity case, Sarah." "Nobody said you were, but I have an extra sandwich in the break room. It'd be a sin to let it go to waste." She brought me a turkey sandwich and a cup of soup. I ate it so fast I almost choked. As I finished, she sat down next to me. "Ray, I heard about David selling the house. I saw the listing on Zillow last month. I thought you moved in with him." My heart stopped. Selling the house? No, David didn't sell it. My landlord did. Sarah shook her head slowly, a look of deep dread crossing her face. "Ray, David was the landlord. He bought that bungalow from the old owner 5 years ago as an investment. He's the one who signed the eviction notice." The soup turned to lead in my stomach. David owned the house? My son, the boy I held when he had the croup, the man I helped with his first mortgage, had been my landlord for 5 years. He had collected my rent checks, checks that came out of my meager pension, and then he had thrown me out like a bag of trash. "Are you sure?" I whispered. Sarah pulled out her phone. A few taps later, she showed me a property tax record. There it was. Owner of record, DC Holdings, LLC. David's initials. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I stood up, my movements stiff. "Thank you for the sandwich, Sarah," I said. "Ray, wait! You can't go out there. It's supposed to drop to 15 degrees tonight. Let me call a shelter." "I'm not going to a shelter," I said firmly. "I have my truck." "Ray, please!" I walked out into the night. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in a deceptive, beautiful white. I climbed into the Chevy. I tried to start it. Click, click, click. The battery was dead. I sat in the dark, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on me. I looked at the flag in my box. I had fought for this country. I had worked until my hands were scarred and my back was ruined. And now I was going to freeze to death in a hospital parking lot while my son was eating steak in Florida. I pulled the wool blanket over my head. I thought about Martha. I hoped she couldn't see me like this. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange warmth start to spread through my limbs. I knew what that meant. It was the sleep they warned us about in survival training. I was drifting off when a bright light hit my side mirror. A car pulled up. A man got out holding a set of jumper cables. He looked like a rough character. Tattoos on his neck, a grease-stained hoodie. "Hey, old-timer, need a boost?" The man's name was Leo. He was a mechanic who had just finished a late shift. He didn't ask why I was sleeping in my truck. He just hooked up the cables, waited for my engine to roar to life, and then handed me a $20 bill. "Keep it," he said when I tried to refuse. "My granddad was a CB. He'd haunt me if I left a vet in the cold. There's a 24-hour diner 3 miles down. Go get some coffee and stay warm." I drove to the diner. I sat in a booth in the corner, the $20 clutched in my hand. I stayed there until dawn, watching the sun crawl over the horizon. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was angry, a quiet, cold anger that I hadn't felt since the war. I went to the public library when it opened. I used their computer, a confusing machine, but I figured it out. I searched for DC Holdings, LLC. I found more than just my house. David had bought 3 other small properties in the area. All of them were affordable housing. He was flipping them, kicking out seniors and low-income families to build luxury condos. And then I saw it, an article in the local business journal. David Carter, local entrepreneur, receives city grant for urban renewal. There was a photo of him, smiling, holding a giant scissors. He looked so much like me at that age, it made me sick. But as I scrolled down, I saw a comment on the article from a woman named Mrs. Higgins. She was 82. She'd been evicted from one of his other buildings. She mentioned that her legal paperwork was signed by a dead man. I frowned. I looked at my own eviction notice, the one the deputy had given me. I looked at the signature for the owner's representative. It was Martha's signature. David hadn't just used a power of attorney for me. He had forged his mother's name on legal documents after she passed away to bypass probate laws and avoid taxes. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My son was smart, but he was arrogant. He thought his old man was too broken to notice. He thought I was just a relic waiting to crumble. I didn't go back to the truck. I walked 3 blocks to the county courthouse. My feet were numb and my chest ached, but I didn't stop. I asked for the clerk of records. "I need to report a fraud," I told the woman behind the glass. The clerk looked at me with the usual crazy old man skepticism, but when I laid out the dates, the date of Martha's death and the date on the notarized documents David had filed, her expression changed. She called a supervisor. "Mr. Carter," the supervisor said after an hour of digging, "if what you're saying is true, this isn't just a civil matter. It's felony forgery and real estate fraud. But we need the original documents. Do you have access to his office?" "No," I said, "but I know where he keeps his backups. He's my son. He's always been predictable." I spent the next 2 days living on hope and gas station protein bars. I waited until David was supposed to be back from Orlando. I knew he'd go straight to his office to check on the urban renewal project. I parked the Chevy around the corner from his sleek glass-fronted office downtown. I watched him pull up in his new Mercedes. He looked tan. He looked happy. He walked inside, carrying a bag of golf clubs. I followed him in. The receptionist tried to stop me. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" "I'm his father," I said, not stopping. I pushed open the door to his private office. David was sitting behind a mahogany desk, staring at a computer screen. He looked up, and for a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes. "Dad," he stammered, "what are you doing here? You look terrible. Are you sick?" "I've been sleeping in my truck, David," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose. "While you were riding roller coasters with my savings." "Now, Dad, let's be reasonable," he said, smoothing his tie. The fear was gone, replaced by that oily businessman tone. "The house was a liability. I'm putting you into a much better facility, a senior living community. I was going to tell you when I got back." "With Martha's signature?" I asked. He went pale. The tan seemed to slide right off his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw the filings, David. You forged her name. You stole from a dead woman and an old man." "You can't prove that," he hissed, leaning over the desk. "And who's going to believe you? You're a homeless vet with no money and a failing memory. I'll have you declared incompetent before you can finish a sentence."
David's words cut deeper than the eviction ever could. He wasn't just a thief. He was a predator. He saw my age as a weapon to be used against me. "Is that what you think?" I asked. "That I'm just a broken old man?" "I think you're tired, Dad. I think you need to go away quietly. I'll give you $10,000 right now. You can go get a nice apartment in Arizona. Just sign this paper saying you authorize all previous transactions." He slid a document across the desk. It was a waiver, a total legal get-out-of-jail-free card. I looked at the pen. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the cold that had stayed in my joints. I thought about the night in the parking lot. I thought about the turkey sandwich from Sarah. I thought about the man with the jumper cables. "10,000?" I asked. "10,000," he nodded, thinking he'd won. "It's more than you'll ever see otherwise." I picked up the pen. David leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. I didn't sign the paper. I leaned forward and wrote 3 words across the middle of the document in big, bold letters. "Not for sale." "What are you doing?" he yelled, reaching for the paper. "I'm leaving, David, but I'm not going to Arizona." I walked out. He followed me into the hallway, screaming that I was making a mistake, that I'd end up dying in the gutter. I didn't look back. I went straight to the local news station. I'd seen their On Your Side segment for years. I walked into the lobby and asked to speak to the lead investigative reporter. I told the receptionist I had a story about the Urban Renewal Grant and a veteran's forged signature. They didn't make me wait. I spent 4 hours on camera. I showed them my discharge papers. I showed them the photos of me and Martha in the bungalow. I showed them the bank statements and the dates on the forged documents. "Mr. Carter?" the reporter asked, her voice soft. "What do you want to happen to your son?" I looked into the lens of the camera. I thought about the boy I taught to ride a bike. And then I thought about the man who let his father freeze so he could have a Mercedes. "I want the truth," I said, "and I want my wife's dignity back." The story aired that night. The headline was, "Steel City Betrayal. Local developer accused of robbing veteran father." The reaction was a landslide. By the next morning, my phone, the one I'd been charging at the library, was blowing up. Not just from reporters, but from people I hadn't seen in years. Men from the mill, neighbors, total strangers. The city council held an emergency meeting. They froze David's grant money. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into DC Holdings. David tried to call me 50 times. I didn't answer. He sent a lawyer to find me at the diner. The lawyer offered me $50,000 to retract the statement. I told the lawyer to buy himself a soul and walked away. But I was still homeless. The Chevy was still my only roof. My back was screaming, and a cough had settled deep in my lungs from the cold nights. I went to the VA clinic. Sarah saw me and immediately put me in a bed. "Pneumonia, Ray," she said, her eyes wet. "You pushed yourself too hard." "I did what I had to do, Sarah," I whispered. "The whole city is talking about you. There's a GoFundMe a stranger started. It's already at $30,000. I shook my head. "I don't want their money. I just want to go home." "The bungalow is tied up in the fraud case now," she said. "The locks are being changed back. The DA says you can move back in tomorrow if the doctors clear you." I felt a weight lift off my chest, but it was replaced by a sudden, sharp pain. I gripped the railing of the hospital bed. "Ray! Ray!" Sarah called out. The monitors started beeping. The room began to spin. I saw Martha. She was standing in our kitchen, wearing her floral apron. She was making coffee. The sun was shining through the window, hitting the linoleum. "I'm coming, honey," I muttered. The last thing I heard was the sound of David's voice in the hallway. He wasn't crying for me. He was arguing with a police officer. "You can't arrest me here. This is a hospital. I have rights." I woke up 2 days later. The air smelled like bleach and oranges. I wasn't in the Chevy. I was in a clean room with soft sheets. The district attorney was sitting in a chair by the window. He stood up when he saw me open my eyes. "Mr. Carter," he said, "David was arraigned this morning. Forgery, grand larceny, and elder abuse. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. His assets have been seized. We found the money he took from your savings. It's been returned to your account." I nodded slowly. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. My son was gone, not to Florida, but to a dark place he'd built for himself. "And the house?" I asked. "It's yours, Ray, for as long as you want it. The city has cleared the title. And that GoFundMe, it's up to $60,000. You never have to worry about a bill again." A week later, I stood on the sidewalk of Miller Street. The neighbors were out. They didn't point or whisper. They cheered. They had mowed my lawn. They had painted the porch. I walked inside. It was quiet. I went to the bedroom and looked at the spot where Martha's dresser used to be. It was empty, but the room felt full. I went to the backyard. I sat on the old bench I'd built 30 years ago. I looked at my hands, worn, scarred, but clean. I had lost my wife, my health, and my son, but I had kept the one thing David could never steal. My name was Raymond Carter, and I was still standing. I looked up at the Ohio sky. The rain had stopped. For the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe.